Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So here we are, you've written the paper, it's been accepted, and you get to go to the conference and give the talk. So what are you going to do? So this is, this talk is about how to give a talk, and I'm trying to give a sense of, again, similarly to with a paper, get a sense of what your talk's for and what to put in, and then we'll finish up with a little bit about how to present it. And I think there's, apart from, so you've just had lunch, and so you're feeling a bit somnolent, but there are kind of some reasons why you might want to listen to this. One is a sort of self-preservation instinct that you might actually be faced with giving a talk, so you might kind of learn a few useful things. But more fundamentally, it's, talks are a lot of what, of what scientific communication is about. Think about it like this. In everybody's life, you may have more or less money. You may be paid more or less. So money is a kind of fungible commodity. You have more, but everybody is given the same 24 hours in the day, right? Rich and poor, intelligent or stupid, we all have 24 hours a day. And when you give a talk, your audience has given you a priceless commodity, namely 20 minutes, or in this case, an hour of their time. So you are doing me the honor of sitting here to listen to what I'm going to rant onto for an hour of your lives, and that hour you will never have again. So it's a kind of precious thing, the attention of a highly qualified audience. You want to sort of take it seriously, and if you put a bit of effort into giving a good talk, then you'll sort of do them the honor, as it were, of their priceless commodity that they're giving you. So there's quite a lot in common. Usually I don't give these I didn't prepare these two talks back to back, and I don't. This is the only occasion in which I give them back to back, and they share quite a lot of material in common. So I'll go quite quickly. So the first thing is just thinking about the purpose of your talk. We talked about the purpose of your paper. The purpose of your talk is kind of a little bit different in a way, right? So the purpose of your paper is you've got to actually get some technical material across. But purpose of your talk, what do? Well, obviously not just to impress your audience, but more importantly, it's not to tell them everything that you know about the subject. Right? There's the terrible danger with a research talk is you think, well, I've got this 12-page paper, and if I speak extremely fast, I might be able to fit almost all of it into 20 minutes. Right? And your audience is sort of faced with this firestorm of Greek symbols, and do they come out the wiser? No, right? So you can't say everything. So what is the purpose? What are you really trying to do? What you're mainly trying to get them to do is you want the people who will take it no further. You want them to take away something that they will value, just like the people who read the first bit of your paper and then fall off, right? And you also want to make some of them so interested that they're going to read the paper, right? So in a way, the talk is a kind of advertisement for the paper. But it's not only advertisement, right, because the people who get only the advert have to take away something valuable, right? So you want them to, just as they're salivating after page 1 of your paper, you want them to be foaming at the mouth after hearing your talk and thinking, wow, it's so amazing, I've just got to go and read that paper. That's your goal, all right? Now, so that's what you're trying to do. Now, what's your audience? Well, of course, your ideal audience is already in awe of your stunning accomplishments. They have flown from the other side of the Atlantic merely to hear your talk. They have read all your papers, and they are agog to hear of the next pearls of wisdom that will drip from your lips. Sadly, even for quite famous people, this simply isn't true, right? What's really the case? Well, it's after lunch, right? And they're sitting there thinking, oh, I'm feeling a bit sleepy now, and I've never heard of this person, and I've certainly never heard of his topic, and maybe I'll just read my email. This didn't used to be a problem, but nowadays, of course, it's a real problem, is that often people go to conference talks, they flip their laptop lid up, and they start reading their email. Because for some reason, we allow wireless networks in talks. So, somehow, what have you got to do? This audience is not, by construction, going to pay attention to you. So what are you going to do? Your goal is to wake them up, right? So you've got to somehow give them a reason to put their laptop lid down and to pay attention to you. Somehow, that is your goal. You've got to give them something early on to make them glad they came to your talk. You want them to leave thinking, oh, that was a fun talk, I'm glad I went to that. I'm glad I didn't sit out in the corridor and talk to my friends. So that's what you're trying to do with an audience who is not already programmed to want that. So how are you going to do it? Well, I want to say something about what things to put in and some things about what to put out. And as in the case of writing a paper, I'm not going to say very much about the main payload of the talk, because the main payload of the talk kind of writes itself, right? That's the main content of your stuff. I want to say a bit about the sort of packaging and content. So the first thing is, you've got to start your talk with some good motivation. I reckon you have about a minute and a half at the beginning of a talk before people decide whether they're going to read their email, right? So in that first minute and a half, you had better get them, if not foaming at the mouth, then at least mildly interested, right? So, and then having got them motivated, you want to get across your key idea. Remember what I said about writing a paper? The intuition is primary. You want to get across the intuition of your main idea in your talk, with as much technical underpinnings as you can and detail as you can, but the intuition of the main idea is absolutely essential. And that's all you need to do, right? You don't really need to fill in a lot of everything else. For example, well, we're going to tell you about things to leave out, what to leave out in a moment. So how are you going to get across motivation? What happens when you're in front of the whiteboard? We've already talked about this morning. The first thing you do is you use an example. Yes. That's what you do with your friends, isn't it? First thing you do is you say, here's an example, right? Because examples convey a sense of what you're trying to achieve, and they give you, and the basic intuitions, and they do it in a way that, hopefully, if the example is fairly simple, somebody can say, I understand that example, I may not understand the full generality. And always, if we learn something abstract, what we do is we look at example 1, example 2, example 3, and then we abstract some general idea. But so often when we present it as, here's the general idea, and then here's an example that illustrates it, right? But that's the wrong way around, because sort of cognitively or something, I don't know whether there's any scientific basis for this, but people understand things easier if they're shown example 1, example 2, and then the abstraction. But academics tend to reverse it. They developed it that way, and then they would put it the other way around when they present it to other people. That's not a good plan, right? So there you are. Examples, incidentally, are not just good only for showing the initial idea. They're also quite good for showing up corner cases. So you present example 1, example 2, that's the general idea. Then you say, all right, here's an idea that generalizes those. And then you can say, but here's an example where it does not work so well. So it can be good for showing up a corner case where the general plan does not work. All right? And that can be good too. So every point you make, I would suggest illustrating with an example. Another thing about talks that is often a difference between different people's talks is whether they are shallow and broad or narrow and deep. Right, so here's my picture for that. Right, so sometimes you have a talk that basically has no content. It amounts to a sort of project overview talk. They can be really annoying because you think, I've given up 20 minutes of my life to listen to this person, and all he's told me is the names of his collaborators and all the famous people who've worked with him, and the vaguest, the names of the systems, and the vaguest idea of what it does, but no meat, right? In a talk, I want some meat. I want some actual idea of what I want, the main idea, right? I want some content for what they've done. On the talks that solely go, sort of start here and immediately go to, the bottom of the San Andreas Trench or some very deep ocean trench, that's not so good either, because if it immediately becomes highly technical, that's not so good. So my suggestion is a sort of, a quick overview, context setting, narrow down to a particular example, then start to go into that in more detail. And that may mean that your paper may go quite deep across a variety of things, and in a talk you may only have time to give some detailed content for a little part of what is in your paper. So let's see, I was talking to what was your name again? Nanju. I was talking to Nanju at lunchtime about her, well, she does music stuff and was extracting thumbnails from music, the key sort of musical theme from a piece of music from the waveforms for the thing. So that was kind of cool. But if I was giving a talk about that, there were quite a lot of things that you described to me. But in a talk, I might focus in one of them and describe that in more detail. So you had 3 strategies for doing something. You might describe one strategy in detail, and another 2 ways to do this that you can read about in the paper. Do you see what I mean? Rather than doing everything to equal depth, which often means shallow. Does that make sense? That's my suggestion. Something in enough detail to actually get your teeth into it. All right. What else did I want to say? Just like in the paper, when you're talking about the key idea, make sure you say, this is the key idea, right? So you can, you stand at the front and you say, if you remember nothing else from this talk, remember this slide, right? That, people wake up when they hear that and think, oh, right, I should look at this slide, at least. They look at it. So, and so rather than letting that be a subtext that you hope they learn, you can say, this is the main idea in the talk. You know, remember this. And they look at it and think, I don't quite understand that, but then they might be intrigued enough to listen to you a bit more. But do you see what I mean about signposting the moment when that comes? You've had a little build-up, and then you say, this is it, guys. Pay attention. I find that quite helpful when I hear it in a talk. And then once you've got that specific goal, you, in planning your talk, are sort of leading up to that moment, as it were, and then following on from it, you can organize your, you know, does this slide contribute to an understanding of that key idea, that key slide? That can be a way to prune your material, because usually the trouble with talks is they get to be too long. You've only got 20 minutes or 25 minutes for a conference talk, and you know, there's a lot to fit in there, so it's a pruning mechanism, is to say, does it lead to your, and in, you know, you might even need to prune back. I was saying your paper should have one idea, your talk even more needs to have one idea. It may even need to be a narrower idea than the paper in order to be able to explain it. Does that make sense? You do not need to cover the whole paper. All right, let's see. We were talking about examples. Oh, I'll fit this. This is just an example of an example, which is a bit of an incestuous thing to do, so I won't do that. So that's what to put in. What do we say? Motivation and the key idea illustrated by examples. That's really all you have time for in a talk. Almost more important is what to leave out. Right, so here are some things to leave out. How often have you been to a talk like this? The first slide the person puts up is something like this. Says here's the outline of a talk. It seems to be very good scholarship, doesn't it? And they say, you know, first I'll talk about the Flugel system and then its shortcoming. Then I'll tell you quite a bit about synthetic epimorphisms and this power reducibility. That's really interesting. That will be a great section of my talk. And then we do benchmark results and related work. And often, actually, particularly if they're a bit nervous, this slide then takes not 10 seconds, but 2 minutes. Now, what did I say about 2 minutes right at the beginning? That's the 2 minutes before they start reading their email, right? And this stuff invariably is incomprehensible. Because I don't know what a synthetic epimorphism is yet, because you haven't got to that part of your talk, right? So it hasn't helped me to show me this. It hasn't helped me at all. I'm sitting here, I'm going to endure or enjoy the linear progression that you're going to make through your talk. I trust you as my guide. Don't tell me this at the beginning. Maybe in the middle. Maybe after you've done a bit, you then say, all right, we've reached a sort of break point. Here, I've done this, I'm about to do this. You know, you can pause for 10 seconds on a slide like that. That just gives a sort of navigational marker. But at the beginning, particularly if it takes you a minute or two and not a second or two, disaster. All right? Do you enjoy that slide on people's talks? Not really. You're waiting, right? You're waiting for you're saying, get on with it. But isn't it extraordinary that everybody, you know that as a listener, you know that as a speaker. People do it all the time. Isn't that weird? All right, so, right, I've said this already. Right, so signposts is not a bad idea, and here was a signpost. Right? I just put a bit that said, I finished one bit, I'm going on to the next bit. Right? And that's really all you need. And then people sort of can draw breath and say, all right, now, the next thing, of course, that people often put in their talks is stuff about related work. Now, often they put this at the end, that's true. Occasionally, and disastrously, they put it at the beginning, disastrously for the same reason as with the paper. But even at the end, in a context of a talk, it does not work very well to have something that's specifically about related work here, because by that time, we're near the end of the talk, time is short, people might like to ask questions. They're kind of going to trust you about related work. They may ask a question about it, and then let's see, let me back up 2 things. During your talk, it's good practice as you go through to say, of course, this builds on the work of so-and-so, just like a citation in the main body of your paper. That's good. If there's a particularly obvious system to compare with, like if you're comparing results for benchmarks or theorems or anything, any kind of evaluation section, then you may well have some related work that constitute your comparators, the things you're comparing with. But a few slides that are devoted only to related work is addressed to a very tiny minority of your audience. Because in a typical conference audience anyway, the technical details of a particular talk will be, the fine-grained technical detail will be understood and knowledgeable by a tenth of your audience. So slides like this are addressed to 1/10 of your participants. 9/10 are now on autopilot. They're just wasting their time. And why would you do that to them? The 1/10, if they're interested, they can ask you, and then you need to be in a position to make a full, well-informed and scholarly response. Right? You need to know the related work. There's no excuse for not that. So you can say, if they say, what about X and Y? You say, I'm glad you asked that question because X and Y were particularly a great basis. In the paper, you'll find some stuff in the related work, but briefly, blah, blah, blah. Right? Do you see what I mean? That's the intuition you want, the sort of the vibe that you want to convey. But don't burn your mainstream talk cycles on it. That's my advice. Does that make sense? Same reason as before. Now, I've said all this already. Yes, but being nice to them, acknowledging co-authors and so forth. Yes. Now, next thing not to put in your talk. What have we had so far? We've had outline, don't put that in. Related work, don't put that in. And this stuff, don't put that in. So often you can watch audiences. Sometimes it's quite interesting to sit near the front and kind of move your chair around a bit so that you can see the audience. And then things are going fine, the speaker's motivated things. And then up comes a slide like this, and the audience goes, oh! They sort of physically recoil because they look at this and they think, here's a slide I'm not going to understand, right? Even if I actually know about type systems. I do know about type systems, and a slide like this in a talk context, has too much information on it. Now, of course, you feel very passionate about it because every line of that figure is sort of drenched in your sweat and blood. It was painful to you to produce, and you went through endless versions. And so, of course, you think that everybody should be amazed and astounded by this wonderful thing. So they should be thrilled, but they're not. That said, I'm not saying eliminate the technical detail. Do I have a slide for this? No, I do not. What you can often do is to take one of these rules, right, one little part of your technical presentation, put that in big, right? So you've got some gigantic thing that would be just one of these things, and then you explain that in some detail. You say, here's the full type system has about 20 rules, and here I'm just going to show you 2 important ones, and you can explain why they're important and explain a bit about the way it works. So you're not kind of describing everything about your system. You're just describing the way a few of the moving parts fit together, and you're saying for the other 18 moving parts, it's pretty similar, and you can find the details in the paper. The only reason I would put up a slide like this is to say, after you've done a couple of those rules, you might say, here's the whole system. Look, it still fits on one page. And then you move on, right? So so at that stage, you're just saying, you can look at this through half-closed eyes. I'm just showing you that it's manageable as a whole, and the details in the paper. Does that make sense? So, because the last thing you want to do is to make your audience feel stupid in a way that to make an expert audience feel stupid. And it is possible to make an expert audience feel stupid by presenting them with too much information that you don't have time to describe in enough detail, even for an expert to follow. And really, you would prefer that even the not-so-experts were able to tag along with your talk and carry them with you. Right? This is a major failure mode for talks. Yeah. Okay? It's hard to avoid this, let me tell you, because you've worked so hard on these technical details. Okay, so that's it for content, right? What to put in, what to leave out. Pretty simple and pretty closely related to the stuff that I was saying about papers, right? So any questions about content or comments about content? Because we're going to go on to presentation stuff in a sec. Yes?
Just quickly go back to the giving the outline. So in my...
yes, this lets people who are listening to the talk later hear the question, yeah.
In my, very personal experience, usually when you take courses that prepare you for giving presentations, they suggest that you do something like that, reasoning that this prepares the audience for what they're going to see. So even if they're not expert, they can map the information they receive to the outline you gave them. So, of course, as you have surely observed, this is a slide that sends people to sleep. But what would be an adequate substitution to get the same effect of orientating the audience.
Right, so
while not,
you're right. It is common advice, and I think
Yeah.
it's bad advice.
Yeah, sure.
But I think what you can do instead is sometimes we'll put up these signpost slides that I've been describing, and sometimes people would put up a signpost slide not with just one big title in the way that I did here, right? But rather they might put up a table of contents like this with one bold, right, to say, here I am, you know, I'm on item 3 now, you can see the things we've passed, you can see the ones we're going to. But what you don't do is stop and explain all the steps. So it's where you're just helping them to navigate through your talk, but you're not describing all the items. That's the key thing, is to avoid an inadequate description of the contents. Yeah.
And do you feel that giving examples would substitute this function? That in an example you could actually already contain
No,
more
I
or
wouldn't.
less,
I think examples complement this. So, you know, even though you've been using examples, I still have a little signpost to say I've reached the break point. Now we've finished the technical details, now we're going to go to evaluation. And you don't need to hesitate very long on the signpost. You're more just giving your audience a bit of navigational clues. Right? Sometimes people have slides that have at the bottom a kind of, or the top little contents slide in small type. I think some PDF, some Unix-based slideware stuff lets you do this. Sometimes it says it has slide numbers, right? And sometimes it says slide 3 out of 20, yes. Sometimes it says slide 3 out of 87. This is a disaster. Slide numbers are okay. Never, never, never put 3 out of 87. Just put 3. 3 is kind of useful because then people can say at the end, they can say, on slide 7, could you just go back to slide 7 because I wanted to ask you a question about that. 3 out of 87, the audience becomes fixated on when you're going to finish. You know, they're thinking 3 out of 87, they're doing long division in their head and thinking, whoa, we're way into tea time, right? Disaster. Do not do this. Yes. Oh, sorry. You had a question? Well, the microphone's here just now, so we'll go there next. Oh, beg your pardon. No, you've got one already. Yeah.
Returning back to examples at the beginning.
Yes.
Some presented work can be very specific, and example can be really big. I mean.
Oh, an example might be big.
Yeah, and what to do then?
Well, I don't know. You have to find a little example. I don't know how to help. Somehow, if you explain it to somebody in your office, you can't take 20 minutes to describe your first example. Somehow you find a way.
Okay.
That's just human nature, you know. Okay. How can I help you? You've just got to find a way to make some kind of example that will anchor the intuition.
What to do if this example have some, you have to use some terms. Should I try to briefly say about them something?
Oh, if the example uses specialized terminology, then you kind of have to introduce that as you go along. Yeah.
And to say them into years.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's worse to give a sort of 10-minute introduction and have sent half your audience to sleep. Yeah. So you have to make compromises. I don't know how. I can't. In generality, I don't know how to help any more. Yeah. Sorry, you had a.
So I do not totally agree with you on that you shouldn't give the slide count. If you prepare the presentation with 87 slides, it's better not to give that information. But if it's very low, like 20, let's say, this actually can motivate people to pay attention more because they know it's short, and just 2 more slides. And
all right. Well, you try it.
Well,
talk to your colleagues. Do a poll.
This is what we do with perceptual experiments. Like
okay, you actually know about this stuff.
I mean no. When we do some other experiments, we put the number of the test cases and the counter because people like to see this progress bar, how much they did already and how much is left. They like to see it.
Okay, you do that. I'm not going to. Yeah.
So I was mentioned how long my talk will be at the start of the presentation.
Oh.
Just to give an indication. How do you feel?
Oh, that's good. Yes, everybody in the audience and you should know when you're expecting to finish. Absolutely. Usually that's set for you, right? But if it's not set for you, then you want to because you form a sort of contract with your audience that, you know, here we are. So if I'm at all unsure, I'll be saying, you know, I'm expecting to speak for about 45 minutes. Is that right? And I'll look at the host or something. But you really want to check that before you start to make sure. Yeah.
Okay,
because there is a kind of implicit contract. Yes.
You were talking
Yes.
There are some templates in LaTeX Beamer, and they have a slide panel which tells audience each and every time, like for each and every slide, where you are and what is going to come.
That's right.
So is it a good idea to tell?
I don't know. It's not as bad as having a slide count. It still has a slight worry that he's only on topic. But personally, as an audience member, I've never found that very helpful. But it's not as bad as having a slide count. I think I'm sort of neutral with respect to it. I certainly don't see it as a big feature as an audience member. But try it out. Ask your friends. Conduct polls. Try it both ways. We've lost. Oh, we used to have 2 microphones, didn't we? One of them's got lost somewhere.
If you put your hand up for the next question, and I'll pass it around.
So what about having a message of the talk early on?
Oh, yes. So, well, I guess the question is, what about having a message of the talk early on? Yes, you early on want to give an idea. Why should I listen to this talk? That's your sort of motivation.
And in the end, give the takeaway message, which is exactly corresponding to that slide, but making people convinced that these 2 points were what I told you.
Finishing up with a slide that has a sort of one-line summary and a URL that you don't make much of a song and dance about it. It's just your last slide, and then it's just sitting there on the screen while you're answering questions or something else is happening. I wouldn't talk very much about it, but it's quite good to have a last slide that will stand by itself as you are doing the finishing up and questions part. Okay. Let's just go on to talk a bit about presentation. So this is the sort of physical part of standing up and giving a talk. So you've got your slides ready now, right? What are you going to do? So the very first thing is try to be enthusiastic about your talk. Enthusiasm is another of those things like love. It doesn't you're not no poor if you've given it, but it's like maybe it's more like sunshine. If a presenter is enthusiastic, you can see the audience sort of opening up their petals like this to be receptive. And if the presenter sort of kind of hides behind the podium and says, well, I'm really sorry I'm here and it's going to be a really boring talk and you probably won't want to listen to it and I'm not very interested in it either, but here we go. And now, slide 1. It doesn't happen quite as extreme as that, but some people, and it's for good reasons, like they're nervous, they kind of give the impression that they're and this is a superficial impression, but it makes them feel as if they're not very interested in the talk either. Certainly they're not enthusiastic. Whereas you want to convey, you want to sort of pour out a tidal wave of excitement about your talk. Your whole life has been leading up to this point. You are just revved by the thrill of the work that you've done, and you're burning to share it with your audience. Right? That alone, your sense of passion about it, will make your audience vastly more receptive, vastly more inclined to devote their precious cycles to understanding what you're saying. There's no substitute for it. Now, if you're a naturally shy person, that is much harder to do. All I can tell you is that even if you're a naturally shy person, behaving fraudulently like an extrovert, fling your arms about kind of person works really well. Nobody can tell that you're bluffing, right? So you just have to pretend to be an extrovert and everything will be cool, right? So let's see, receptive, yes. And the other thing is, physically, it's quite helpful because when you're about to give a talk, you're quite in a nervous moment, and the act of sort of moving around is quite helpful in just make you feel physically more relaxed. Now, so that's about enthusiasm. That is if you remember nothing else, remember tidal wave of enthusiasm about your work. Now, which you're not saying this is better than anybody else. You're just saying this is exciting to me. That's an unmistakable message you've got to convey. Now, it's also quite important to be familiar with the slides that you're presenting, right? So I say write them the night before. Usually I don't write my slides the night before, but you need to go through them the night before, and preferably, unlike me, I've been looking at the screen rather too often. It's best if you can give your talk barely looking at the screen at all. It is amazing how many people give their talks primarily like this. They say, ideas will occur to you during the conference as you obsess about your talk during other people's presentations. Their back is to the audience. How awful is that, right? You need to know your slides better than I know these ones, and then you can relax and just tell your story to the audience, right? And actually, it is quite cool if during the day you hear another talk and it's kind of relevant to yours. You can alter one of your slides to put in a little quote from that talk or a little reference to it. Then you don't need to make a song and dance about it. Just go past it quite quickly during your talk. You don't need to say, whoa, clever me, I've altered my talk, during the day. But somehow during the day you're going to be obsessing about it anyway, aren't you? Nothing is more important in your mind as you're listening to other people's talk. It's coming up, it's coming up, it's coming up, right? So you can't not obsess about it. So you might as well get some payoff. So it can be quite nice. So don't make a big deal about it. Just a little side reference, and somebody will come up to you afterwards and say, that's quite cool. It's no big deal, but it's quite nice. Now, another thing you, of course, must not do. Are you enthusiastic and passionate? You know your slides, but you don't apologize. Right, so, it's surprising how often people do apologize. They say, I'm a mere worm, I'm not a very important person, I'm only a sub research student. My supervisor would give a much better talk. I haven't had very long to prepare these slides. The results aren't quite finished. Right? None of this is of interest to your audience. Right? They don't want to know all the reasons it's not a good talk. They want you to hear you tell the story. All right? So don't bother to apologize. It's just not. It's not helpful to your audience. They don't even know how to react. Right? It's as if you're saying, "Be sympathetic to me." What do you really want for them? Want from them? You can just leave this stuff out, is my advice. Now, so there you are, right? So the previous speaker is on, they're in question time, and you're sitting kind of in your chair, like this. And at the moment you're sitting there, and the question's coming to an end, you are thinking to yourself, I'm physically unable to stand up. My legs will not operate. And this is a very unsettling situation, right? Because you think everybody else seems perfectly fine and confident and able to give good talks. But in fact, the first thing to realize is that everybody feels like this, bar none. Even experienced speakers, certainly in big public conferences, they are very nervous before they go on. And the second thing is to realize is that actually your legs will operate in the end. So the only thing I can suggest particularly as this kind of tactic is to just memorize your opening sentences. I think if you can avoid scripting your whole talk, that is very helpful. Reading from a script is not conducive to forming a personal eye-to-eye contact link with your audience, right? But the first sentence or two is very helpful, right? If you can just, the moment you stand up, their eyes, like lasers, go vroom, and you're suddenly in the firing line from, 100 machine guns. At that moment, your brain will go blank, and it's very helpful just to have your first couple of sentences scripted, so you know what you're going to say to begin with. And then you're off, right? So, because you know your slides, you're excited about it. Just that first bit that's very helpful. And it stops that initial hesitancy and apologeticness. Personally, I find it very helpful to physically move around. Don't get stuck behind a podium. Make sure you've got a radio mic if you possibly can. And physically move around and move your arms about and stand on things, or, do whatever possible to just not get this kind of rigid stuckness feeling. And that's another thing that's difficult for shyer people. But like I say, just behave as if you're not. And remember to go to the loo. Though, actually, not that it really matters. By the time you're speaking, you won't feel like going to the loo anymore, but it's in those 10 minutes beforehand you'll think, gotta go. All right. Now, we've talked about facing the audience, not the screen. That's important. And, of course, it was easier in the days of overhead projectors. I date back to when we had physical acetates. You would put them on the overhead projector, and so the OHP was between you and the audience. That was quite helpful. Now, of course, it's on the screen, so it's difficult not to look back unless you either have things pretty well memorized, or if you can strategically place your laptop so that you can glance sideways at it, that's helpful. Here, they've helpfully put a screen right at the back. That's very useful. So if your auditorium has that, then make sure you know, and make sure, because otherwise you can forget to even look at it. Spend as little time as possible. These things often do come with laser pointers, right? So you can point to things like that. And you'd be amazed how much time people spend, because they want to point to something on the slide, right? They'll do this, and that forces them to have their back to the audience. Not only that, but these laser pointers are kind of like amplifiers for your nervousness, right? They just show that your hand is shaking, right? It's a very sensitive amplifier. You sort of draw Lissajous figures, with parabolas and things. So it's, I would use pointers very sparingly and try to write slides that don't require you to point at the screen if you can avoid it. I mean, sometimes it's okay, but just not as much as possible. Not. You want to, I'm sure you've all been told this, try to speak to people at the back of the room. So even though you're wearing a microphone, don't kind of sort of mutter into your microphone and assume that everybody can hear you. Pretend that you haven't got a microphone and speak as if the person at the back of the room was listening, right? Was wanting to hear. And then the microphone typically will then get turned down by somebody until it works okay. Another quite good thing is to, so you want to form a sort of eye contact with your audience. So it's good to sort of look them in the eye, and some people will look you in the eye more than others. Right? So, and some people will just look at you, and other people will kind of unconsciously, they'll nod, right? So as you look at them, they're sort of following along, they'll just do this, right? That's quite useful, because if they stop doing that, whoa! They're falling. Now, actually, today I haven't identified any nodders. It's a great shame. I was kind of looking out for one. But you'll often see in an audience, and they're quite useful little litmus tests. And of course, so if you're looking for somebody who's nodding, that helps you to look at them rather than at your shoes or the wall or the ceiling or the slides, right? Got to look at your audience, right? Because you're connecting with people, not machines. All right. And questions, right? So we've had questions. So now in a conference situation, typically the protocol is, 20-minute talk, questions afterwards. And particularly if it's a big conference, if there's 100 people there, it's very difficult to do anything else, right? And particularly with a short talk that's quite compressed. Anything that is more of a seminar situation or kind of, like a 40-minute or 1-hour talk, I think it's much better to ask for questions during the talk. Talk to your session chair, the person who's hosting you, and say, is it okay if we take questions during the talk? I'd really like to. And they will invariably say, yeah, that's fine. And you want to kind of encourage your audience to do that, because as soon as you get a question, whoa, that means someone is sufficiently engaged with what you're doing to actually ask you a question about it. Right? That is great. So you don't want to. Sometimes you find a speaker who is on a roll, right? They've got their slide deck, they are going down the plan, and you ask a question, and they say their subliminal message is, that's a really distracting and uninteresting question. I'm just going to sort of try to dispose of it as quickly as possible so that I can get back to my talk, right? This is not the message you want to convey, is it? Right? You want to say, you want to convey the message. That's an interesting question, and so you can kind of respond to it reasonably fully. Sometimes you want to say, hold that question for 2 slides. If I don't answer it in 2 slides' time, ask me again. That's a perfectly fine response, and sometimes appropriate. Just occasionally you get somebody who's like a sort of terrier. They get their teeth into something, they keep asking a follow-up question, and you can see that your whole talk is going to pot, right? You have a 1-hour talk, you're going to spend 30 minutes on this guy. Right? So at that stage, you have to use your judgment and say, this is a great line of questioning, but if we follow it any further, I'm not going to get to the main point of my talk. And the rest of the audience is thinking, thank goodness he's shut him down. Right? So, so you have to make these judgments. So being responsive to questions does not mean being unconditionally responsive. Follow up for a bit and then close down. And if it's completely so you just have to use your judgment. Right? All right. Questions. That's right. But if you get to the end, right, and you run out of time, right, because you've answered so many questions, what do? Should we carry on? No. You're going to truncate your talk. So you need to have in mind some mechanism for sort of hopping over the last bit of your talk, right, so that you can get to the end. That's quite important. It's much better to have such a lot of feedback and questions during the talk as a fully engaged audience that you didn't quite get to the end of the material you had prepared for your talk. That's fine, right? They're engaged. They're going to read the paper, right? Compare that with an audience that's completely stony-faced the whole time and you're way at the end. No, I don't know. I know which I prefer. All right? All right. Where are we? These things are good, right? Being liberated from being close to your laptop is very helpful, so that you can then walk around a bit, having a little pointer. Do some obviously sensible things like make sure the technology works before your talk. It's so embarrassing. The audience finds it embarrassing when the speaker goes up for their talk and the technology does not work. Then they're thinking, you know, what do we do now? Can we chat? Can we, you know, can we go away? And oh, the speaker must be so, you know, stressed out. It's bad for everybody. So make sure that your projector is going to connect to the thing before, well before. You know, go at the end of the previous session or the session before that. Sometime that gives you recovery. If you're trying to fix it online in public, it's very, very stressful. Don't go there. You don't want to do that. Backup copies. A few things about presenting slides. So often you'll see this, right? They'll say, oh, I've got a point number 1, there's point number 2, and then there's point number 3. And then, they're really important, point number 4. I find this very irritating, right? So, because it's kind of condescending, it says to the audience, I don't really trust you to pay attention to me if I put up all the points at once. It's like sort of primary school. So to me, people vary about this, but to me this is kind of irritating. It's kind of sometimes okay if there's a kind of punchline to reveal, right, that says, you know, kind of almost like a joke, or here's a puzzle, what's the answer? That's okay. But as a way of, sometimes every single slide comes on a piece at a time. I advise against it to myself. And I strongly advise against this. Just sometimes when you're displaying an algorithm, say, a sorting algorithm, it can be quite helpful to have things moving around, because there's semantic content. But as a presentational technique, I find it very distracting. Yeah?
For example, if you have a complicated formula or something, you have an equation and then you want to illustrate it, and then I think effects can be helpful, right? Animation. So you say, okay, now I explain this part of the equation, you show it, then you move to another part and you add some stuff to your figure, so on.
Yep, so if there is a specific presentational region you're trying to highlight a particular part, we might show the whole equation and say, actually this is a bit complicated looked at altogether, let's take it one piece at a time. So the audience can tell where you're going. That's fine, yes. So I'm not saying never do this, just that I think the routine, every slide, one point at a time, is the wrong default. Yeah. Okay. Now we talked about truncating your talk. It's really important to finish on time. Really important. In any situation, whether it's a seminar or a conference or just any time, if you need to know, you have this contract with your audience about when you're going to finish. And somehow, if you get to the finishing time and you're still carrying on, your audience has switched into a mode in which said, we're supposed to be finished. What's happening now? You know, they're starting to look around, they're looking at the host, they're thinking maybe it's lunchtime. If they're students and they have ring binders, they start snapping their ring binders, you know, those little snappy things. Somehow their attention becomes very bifurcated. Now at that point, some speakers look at their host and they say, where's Stephen? Yes, they say, Stephen, but we're kind of out of time, but I've just got another 5 slides. You know, would you like to see them? And at this point, the host is sort of looks like a rabbit in the headlights, because the rest of the audience is going. But you're eye to eye with the speaker who's saying, you know, do you want to see my lovely slides? So, you know, what does Stephen do? He says, sure, Simon, go ahead. And the audience is going, no, no. So you don't want to get into this situation and put your host in this situation. What you want to say is firmly, right, you know, so we've had plenty of questions. That's been very exciting. And I'm going to, just going to skip to the summary slide now. Very happy to talk to more of you afterwards. There are a few more slides. There'll be that kind of thing, you know. So you want to make clear that you have got more material you could do. And then they may beg you, you know, on bended knee. Then that's okay. But you definitely do not want to say, shall I carry on? That's embarrassing for everybody. Right. So, yeah. So actually planning a few points at which you can skip is quite good, so that if you do run out of time, because it's hard to predict exactly, you can do practice talks and so forth, but it is quite hard to know, particularly if you get questions, about whether you may run out. And so it's good to sort of plan a few points at which you could sensibly jump. So it's actually not that hard, I think. In some ways, it's because the general standard of giving talks is not terrible by any means. Most conference talks are quite interesting, but it's not that high. I think by doing some quite simple things, you can make your talk quite a lot better, and it's not very difficult to do that. And if they're better, then your audience will be happy, will be happier, you'll be happier. Everybody is happy. But in that vein, if you think about all of this stuff when you're listening to talks, I think you may get quite a lot of benefit. So you can sometimes go to a talk, and rather than listening to the technical content specifically, perhaps if it's an area that's less interesting to you, you can listen to the sort of process content, whereas you're going to go to, you know, 10 or 50 or 100 times as many talks that you give, right? So if you listen to talks and you think, what made that talk engaging? What was good about it? Or you go to a talk that you really found not engaging at all, and you think, why didn't I like that? Do a bit of sort of reflective analysis. I think that can be very helpful. And you can then say, oh, so why do I do that? Any other questions or observations? But I'm more or less done at this point. Yeah.
What do you think about having notes in your hand, looking at the notes?
Hold on.
Notes on your laptop or in your hand. I think that's fine. So I think if you're, so the question is whether if you have notes in your hand, is it okay to look at notes? Absolutely. So again, some people are more fluent and confident than others. It can be, the reason that people often spend their time looking at their slides is as a sort of prop to make sure that they're making the points in the order that they wanted to, and it may be easier for you to hold something as well. So now you've got notes in one hand and your clicker in the other, so you need to make sure you've kind of got enough hands. Or maybe you put them on, it's whatever works for you. What you want to avoid, I think, is fixating on your notes so that you lose eye contact with your audience. You want a kind of quick reference to your notes to make sure you're making the points in the order. And audiences are fine with you saying, they're quite happy to have a little pause. If you say, all right, so now we finished that bit, and then you sort of pause just for a moment to look at your notes, just sort of gather yourself. A 5-second or 10-second pause, that's okay. It's the, yeah, you don't have to emit continuous sound. Yeah.
We were once told we should never ever use the sound effects in our talks. I mean, unless of course it's necessary for our research, but other than that, we should totally avoid it. So where do you stand on that?
Oh, for sound effects, yeah. You mean the text flies in going, woo? No, I wouldn't do that, right? In fact, I would really only use sound if you're doing something like showing a video, or like if you're doing, playing a music thumbnail. Obviously you've got to use sound. But the sound, mainly, is your voice making human contact with your audience. That's your most powerful medium. The eye contact, voice contact, that's it. They're human beings, yeah.
If you have been asked a question that you are not sure about the answer, what is the best way? Is just to say, I don't know, or to give the part of the answer you know and you are not too sure about it?
Well, I think the thing you must avoid at all costs doing is just waffling, right? If you just say, you think, I don't really know the answer, but I can emit a wall of jargon and smoke that will sort of conceal me inside, conceal the answer. Anyway, so don't do that. I think if you really don't know the answer, it's best just to say, that's an interesting question, but I never really thought about that and I don't know the answer. Or sometimes people will talk about related work that you do not know about. In that case, you have to say, that's really intriguing, and that is not a paper that I've read, and I would like to. So, could you help me afterwards by giving this? I think honesty is the best thing. If you know part of the answer, well, you can say that too. You can say, well, I'm not sure I can give you a full answer, but part of it I know is this. So just tell it the way it is, but avoid fog. Avoid fog. Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
Could you please make us a very, very small example of very deep technical presentation, how to make it interesting? For example, about Haskell language.
Well, so the question is, how would I make a deep technical question interesting?
Interesting, yeah. Could you make an example of this?
Sure. So, kinds. Right, so this is a talk about, about kind polymorphism in Haskell. So kind polymorphism is, well, it's a fairly technical part of a type system. Usually we're familiar with type polymorphism, that's generics in Java. Kind polymorphism is polymorphism at one level up. So by any standards, it'd be somewhat esoteric. So what I did in this talk was, first of all, to kind of set the context by about why I'm interested in type systems as a way of increasing confidence in programs. And then here was my first signpost slide. And then what I do? Example, right? So I gave an example of a program that in Haskell, and this was an example using ordinary Haskell, and then what was I trying to do? I was trying to say, now if we look at the kind of the type variable A, it has kind star, and F has kind star to star, and then tree has this kind, but that's not, and then I said, and here's a program that you could also write that you can't write. So I was sort of working by way of a particular example. You see all these EGs, right, every time. And then I gave an example that you cannot, that you need to be able to do. So see all the time, example, example, example. Did I get to actually having a, right, so finally I got to a payload. This is a type constructor with a polymorphic kind. So I've sort of built up to the moment at which I say, this is the thing you would obviously want to do. Then what happened? I started to give a bit more formality. Right, so here's a little BNF for kinds. And then did I start to give some, I don't think I gave any typing judgments in this talk as well, but I gave some more complicated examples. So in effect, the talk didn't have much formality in it, but it had loads of examples, all of which were aimed at illustrating the need for this thing and some sense about how it worked. So I don't know whether that's a good example, but it certainly is a technical question.
Thank you.
But you could see that what I did not do was to give a slide with hundreds of type system rules and theorems and so forth. I was just saying, I want people to look at this and say, that's cool, I wish I could write that program.
Yeah, I just see it's a very good example of the presentation itself.
Right,
Thank
that
you
was
very
rather brief. Good, okay, good, yeah.
I have a question about using chalk and blackboard. So, for example, sometimes if your laptop breaks right in the middle of your presentation, you have to keep in mind what is next, because it's not useful at all to try, I don't know, within 15 minutes presentation, try to, I don't know, reboot or do something with your laptop. And so it's very subjective. And so once I used the chalk and blackboard and people were, oh, cool. That's cool, actually. So we almost forgot how to do that. And I know that other people say, oh, no, never do that because the people fall asleep. And so what was your suggestion?
It's, of course, in the old days, we only could give talks using chalk and blackboards or whiteboards. Often, certainly in conference venues, they don't typically have a whiteboard or a chalkboard that's big enough for an audience of 100 or 200 to see. So it's quite hard to give a blackboard kind of presentation. In a seminar situation, I have seen people who've had no slides at all. They have from the beginning said, this is a kind of interactive development. I'm going to treat it more like a seminar. And they write stuff on the board, and that's the way and I think that's quite engaging for a more interactive kind of presentation. What was I going to say? Yes, so as far as if the technology fails, if your laptop fails, that is possible. So if you've got a backup on a USB stick, somebody else's laptop will work. That's usually a good plan. What was the other? That was it. That was it about presentations. Yes?
Just from my personal experiences, I'll just add an observation, and that is it can be very helpful to record a video of yourself giving your talk, because you can watch that video and go, I just did all the things that I hate to see when presenters give a presentation. And it's very quick and easy, especially with a phone or something like that. It's very easy to do that. So.
That's a really good idea. Yes, and these days, you're right, it is much easier. So every time you give a talk, get one of your friends to make a video of you. Because giving a talk in front of an audience is also a different experience to giving a practice talk to one friend. So if you get the video, the real thing, then you can think, oh no, did I really do that? But it is educational. Yes?
Do you have any tips for dealing with the audience members that ask questions that start off with a very long tirade about stuff they know, and then it's a very long drawn out question, and then somehow often you're expected to paraphrase it for the rest of the audience? I always find these very confronting.
If they have the floor and they are asking a long question, there really isn't much you can do about it, because to cut them off is rude, particularly as a visiting speaker. You hope at some point your host will cut them off, right? You can look appealingly to Stephen. Okay. But and then if they've asked, and then at the point at which they have asked you a question or something, then I suppose you may at that point respond with a brief answer, and can we talk more about it afterwards? But it's only if they start repeating the exercise, right? Then you may be, after you've been round, once or twice, then you say, can we continue this afterwards? You may have to interrupt them but I wouldn't do that the first time. You just have to let them run, I think, the first time. And your audience won't blame you, they'll blame them. Your talk is still a minute shorter as a result, but, sometimes bad things happen to good people. Yes?
During the question sessions, I normally get uncomfortable if I know the audience know more than me in this domain.
Right.
So is it natural or...
Is it natural to worry that the audience knows more than you about the topic you're giving a talk about? It's absolutely natural to worry about it. And it's often true, right? Because often you are giving a talk to, well, presumably, the cream of the computer scientists in your particular area. In many areas, they will know more than you. But because of the fractal thing, it's likely that in this particular patch, you're at least up with the leaders. So I think, I don't know, it's certainly a natural discomfort to feel.
And how do you deal with that?
And, well, I don't know, it depends. It's very rare, in my experience, to get somebody who makes aggressive questioning, right? Who says, you know, you're an idiot. All this was done 2 years ago by so-and-so, right? They may think that, but they will probably phrase it more politely and say, do you know the work of so-and-so? How does it compare, right? It's quite unusual to get an aggressive and knowledgeable questioner. And if you do, then, I don't know, at that point you're into sort of emergency, deal with it however you can. I don't have any generic advice for how to deal with that. But it's sufficiently rare that I wouldn't waste too much sleep over it. But clearly you just always want to be very respectful of your audience and of their knowledge. No, people often say, it sounds naff, but you know, that's a great question. It doesn't take you long to say. And it's lots of people say that, but it is, you know, as a person in the audience who's asking the question, well, actually, the audience member is thinking, maybe this is a stupid question, maybe everybody else understands this and I'm just being an idiot, right? As a questioner, don't you sometimes feel that? And you think, I won't ask that question. I don't really understand this, but probably everybody else does, right? So people who are brave enough to ask questions are probably feeling a little bit exposed themselves, right? I think that's something you might want to worry about more and try to make them feel good by saying it's a great question or something. Yeah. Here.
Oh, yes. Sometimes I feel that my audience is not listening to me, but following my slides. And I don't know whether it's because more attractive or it's more complicated. They are trying to understand my slide. I don't know if it's good or bad, or how can I avoid this?
They're not following you, they're following your slides. Well, their eyes may be on your slide, but their ears are hearing your soundtrack, right? So it may well be that they're listening quite attentively, but they're also sort of processing what's on the screen. I suppose maybe if there's too much on one slide, that might be distracting, perhaps.
Should I confirm by questions, like whether they understand or not?
It depends on the context. In an interactive situation, like with a smaller group of people, you can definitely say, all right, you know, so in fact, I sometimes do this. I say, at the beginning, I say, it would be really great if you would ask questions as we go along, right? And then sort of a third of the way in, I'll say, nobody's asked any questions yet, and that's making me feel nervous. You know, maybe you've all disconnected. It'd be great if somebody wanted to ask a question. Then I'll sort of pause and actually have a little gap of, you know, 20 seconds or 10 seconds. And then everybody sort of shifts a bit uneasily, but maybe then somebody does ask a question. And that can often be something that allows other people to ask questions. The first question is the hard one, right? This isn't more in an not in a conference situation.
Okay, because in one talk I saw that people are really following slides but not listening to me, and I started like asking some small question. It's okay, I'm passing to the other slide. Then I got good feedback, but one or two people said that we felt that as if you are like a lecturer and trying to instruct us, this is not good enough, and then I don't know whether it's good or not.
So I think if you find yourself saying, is it have you read this slide so I can move on? Then probably, that's right, you have lost them from your soundtrack to the slides, right? So you want to make sure your soundtrack is engaging and is directly connected to the slide. Yes. I think that would be a worry.
Okay.
I think something's gone wrong if you find that's the question. Whereas you say, are we okay? You know, so at that point, I feel as if I've finished explaining what's on this slide. Has anybody got any questions about what's here? Right? That's okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. We haven't got
I have a related question, coincidentally. So, on any given slide, do you have any suggestion on how much information should come from the slide, how much information should come from the speaker?
Oh, how much information from the slide and how much from the speaker? I don't have anything very concrete to say. People usually say, don't put too much on the slides. That's the sort of generic guidance. I think, put rather more than presentation people would recommend. But I think that. I don't know what to say. I often don't say everything in the soundtrack that is on the slide. Sometimes there's some, you probably noticed today, there have been some things that I haven't said in sound. But how much information to put on a slide and how much to say.
Maybe I can elaborate because I'm mostly wondering if you present the core of what you want to say on the slide visually and then you elaborate on that, or if you rather have complementary information on the slide which you might not mention while you narrate.
Put the former. No, the former, right? Put the core stuff on the slide that you elaborate a soundtrack around, much better. I think if you've got a separate story going on your slides, like a sort of Twitter feed on your slides, accompanying your, that's not so good. Yeah, we should wrap. Right, good. Guys, thank you very much for being so interactive and for making such a lot of comments and asking questions. It's been great talking to you. Thanks.